And the federal government's new interim report on the Indigenous voice is being viewed as, and I quote, critical and positive as a move towards constitutional reform. But the Institute of Public Affairs claim the shared decision-making model is undemocratic and will only further divide Australians by race. Well, let's take a look at this and some other topics with my panel. Gideon Rosner from the Institute of Public Affairs is joining me from Melbourne, and commercial litigator Caroline Di Russo in Perth. Welcome to you both, but Gideon, I want to start with you. Shouldn't all Australians share in the decision-making in this country, regardless of race and ethnicity?
You're right, Cory, and all Australians do share in decision-making regardless of race and ethnicity. The reason that the federal government is looking now, I understand, at a legislated model as opposed to, what the Uluru Statement called for, which was a referendum to write into our constitution, is because they know that a referendum would go down in flames. It would be rejected by the Australian people. Not because Australians are racist, because they aren't racist. The same Australian people that voted 90% to 10 in 1967 to take race out of the Constitution will not vote to put it back in and give certain civil and political rights to some Australians and not to others. That is not who we are as a people, and the Australian people will never stand for it.
Caroline, that's a really interesting point. As someone who's in the law, the government is no longer looking to get something through as a referendum and a constitutional amendment. They're going to implement legislation because they know the people don't want it. What are your thoughts about that process?
I always wonder what the political motivation is behind something like this. And look, ultimately, it still needs to get through both houses. I would say, look, this is probably something that needs to be taken to an election at the very least before that turns into a bill and goes through the houses. We have spoken about this in the constitutional sense, and I think Gideon is right. I just don't think it would get up. I don't think that it would wash with everyday Australians, principally because we keep being told every day that, everything's about equality, and then all of a sudden this here kind of flies right in the face of that. So I can understand why the legislative model is being toyed with, but ultimately I wonder how that there is actually going to be achieved. And when I looked at the interim report, instead of answering questions, it actually raised more questions for me. And sometimes I wonder, do we do things that we ultimately end up having more issues rather than solving issues? So I think we need to have a really clear idea, regardless of which path we go down, as to what this is designed to achieve, because we could end up potentially with a bigger problem than the one we've got.
Yeah, that's a fascinating perspective, because a lot of us think that government creates a lot of problems, and so if they do, then why would you want more government in the attempt to solve the problems that they've already created? It's nonsensical. But it's a cause for division, and another divisive topic, of course, is cancel culture. And it's happening here, it's happening all over the world. But a conservative commentator and a former baseball star, a guy by the name of Curt Schilling in the States, has had his insurance policy cancelled by AIG. And the reason was he's got a social media profile that's talking about things AIG don't like. Now, let's remember, Gideon, AIG received hundreds of billions of dollars in the bailout in 2008 from the American taxpayer. And now they're censoring people over their social media. It seems wrong.
Well, it is absolutely wrong. You're right, partly because a company that receives millions and millions of dollars from all Americans will now choose which Americans it chooses to provide services to. But also, look, I'm a big follower of Curt Schilling. I think he's fantastic. The only thing he is guilty of is showing the American left up to be the hypocrites that they are. Cory, this is getting really scary, this cancel culture. We're not talking about Twitter pylons anymore. We're talking about the 74 million people who voted for Donald Trump potentially losing their insurance, their banking services, their ability to get on an aircraft. What do the political and cultural elites think will happen from all of this? What do they think this will achieve? Because this is heading in a very dangerous direction, and it's more dangerous for the political and cultural elites and for the left than it is for conservatives, I can tell you that much. It'll make the next election in the US look like make the 2016 election or the Brexit election look like a contested AGM at a suburban bowls club.
I think we'll be talking about the US elections for the next 12 years at the very least. But Caroline, we've got to draw a line in the sand at some point when it comes to cancelling people's access to services based on their personal views, because these are not extreme views. These are just people who are expressing our political preference that we've had a time-honoured respect for difference of opinion. I mean, where is that line in the sand going to be drawn, or where should it be drawn?
That's exactly right. And the thing that concerns me is when you're talking about someone's insurance policy, that's not something that's public. So for AIG, what I wonder is, where's the corporate risk for them in just retaining the policy as it is, as opposed to the public storm that has been created by trying to cancel that policy? And we saw what happened with Gillette a couple of years back. They did their absolute birthday after that advertisement that they put out, and they really upset people. And ultimately this does come down to the people, and people get to choose. So when corporations start behaving this way, it's actually a responsibility on all of us to be able to make better decisions. And with regards to AIG, it wasn't just that they received the bank bailout in 2008. But in 2005, my understanding is that they were investigated by the corporate regulator in relation to some kind of accounting scandal. And the following year, they settled, and they had to pay out something like $1.6 billion in restitution and penalties. So they probably should go easy on the Conservatives, because they're desperate hypocrites.
Yeah, what an excellent point you make, not only about the hypocrisy, but the fact that this is not a public contract, and no one would know whether they're backing in Kurt Schilling's insurance policies or not. It's crazy, and it's reaching into almost every part of our lives. So, but let me move on for a second, because something that I'm a bit concerned about. We're seeing in Denmark and in Britain, they've both confirmed today that they're going to issue vaccine passports now as part of a trial. This is going to be a precursor for you to access some services or enter the country. The good news, of course, is that they're free as long as you've had the vaccine. Government's giving you free things. We should be worried about it. Gideon, it works through a phone app. The technology is going to track you. It's going to be doing this. Is this just a forced way of making us comply, and governments having more authority over what we can see, do, hear, and where we can go?
Yes, it absolutely is, Cory. This is... Look, whatever you think of the vaccine, this kind of surveillance, this kind of tracking, it's leading to a kind of quasi-social credit system that should make us all worried. But what really worries me, what bothers me about this debate, Cory, is that we're now being told that even when we have a viable vaccine, it doesn't mean that restrictions will ease. It doesn't mean that the risk of transmission is any lower, and it doesn't mean that anything will change. First we were told that the whole point of all these lockdowns and border closures was to flatten the curve. We did that. Then we were told that the point of extending them and prolonging them wasn't eradication necessarily, but to wait until a vaccine arrives. We are looking like we're at a point that we've done that now, and yet still we're being told that these restrictions, this way of life is continuing. We won't get back to normal at this rate, either because our politicians and our leaders are stupidly and absurdly risk-averse, or for some other nefarious reason. It's very concerning, very bad, and what is required for something like a vaccine today might be required for any manner of other things tomorrow. We should all be very, very concerned.
Yeah, I agree with you absolutely there, Gideon. But Caroline, you're in the secessionist West, where no one's allowed in or out unless you're a dinky-die Western Australian, I understand. But your Premier has announced a new rule, and it seemed reasonable at first blush. All airport visitors and travellers now have to wear a face mask. But then he's tacked them on and said otherwise they risk a $50,000 fine. Now surely this must have all you Westies ready to sack him and move interstate and come over to South Australia or somewhere decent.
Well, I wish, but it doesn't, because we're quite enjoying our subjugation out west. This $50,000 is absolutely ludicrous. It is the most ridiculous, up to, but in any event, a $50,000 fine is absolutely ludicrous. The bit that I love in the policy, though, is if you enter the airport perimeter in a car on your own, you don't need to wear a mask. But if you're in a car with a group of people outside the perimeter and then you enter onto the perimeter, as you enter on the perimeter, you have to put a mask on, otherwise you risk the fine. So I'm not sure how the risk profile changes between being outside the perimeter in your car with certain people and inside the same car with the same people, but that makes absolutely no sense. And it's like they did this in Queensland a week ago, and Mark McGowan was like, hold my beer, I'm going to do something a bit more serious here.
Well, he's got an election coming up after all, but he's obviously aware this must be a super smart strain of coronavirus that knows where perimeters are and where you know, the curfews kick in and it only becomes active at certain times. And it's just nonsensical, and it's what Gideon said, of course, is there's inconsistencies, it's not logic, and the advice even from experts is being changed on a weekly, monthly basis, and the rest of us are as confused as anything. Gideon, it smacks of political control for McGowan. It smacks of forcing the people to do things that otherwise they wouldn't do on the virtue of common sense. This is a bad precedent, isn't it?
It's a terrible precedent. Look, I agree with Caroline, this is absolutely bloody ridiculous. Whatever you think of masks, whatever you think of the risk of corona, there is no rational person that would tell you that the risk to other people of not wearing a mask is proportionate to a fine of up to $50,000. All I'd say to Mark McGowan is if airports are such super spreader locations, then maybe he should stop holding people up there with his border closures. Maybe we should try to move people through the airports of WA a little bit more quickly. Let's see how that works.